Another interview is resurfacing, giving us a look inside the world of Sean Diddy Combs. The rapper's infamous party lifestyle seems to have been an open secret in the entertainment industry, and celebrities were often asked about their interactions with the music mogul. We're going to take a look at what artist Machine Gun Kelly had to say about a two-day party fest with P. Diddy. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Rumors, allegations, strange stories, they just continue to roll in about Sean Diddy Combs, and that includes not only old interviews that Combs himself did on various talk shows and with late-night TV hosts, but also what other A-list celebrities have said about him over the years. Now, if you've been following the story, you know that Sean Combs is currently locked up in the Metropolitan Detention Center, a notoriously violent and dirty detention center out in Brooklyn that is plagued with violence, drug smuggling. I mean, it just got raided by the feds in a massive sweep for contraband. But Combs, he is sitting there because he is accused of being the head of a criminal enterprise that used his power, money, influence to organize large, pre-planned sex performances referred to as freak-offs. According to a civil lawsuit that he settled with ex-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura, as well as the indictment from the Southern District of New York, Combs would have his employees bring in drugs and male prostitutes and would have sex with whoever Combs wanted. Ventura claims that Combs used various drugs like marijuana and ecstasy to keep her compliant, forced her to perform sex acts with these sex workers on film. And while these so-called freak-offs are at the center of federal racketeering and sex trafficking charges that he currently faces, Combs' parties in general are what he's been known for over the years. It seems to have been an open secret in Hollywood and beyond that a Diddy party was bound to not only be swanky and exclusive, but also pretty wild. Be clear, though, not necessarily criminal, right? There could be wild parties where there were no crimes that were being committed, but they were wild, they were infamous. And let me just say this again, to be very clear. As we sit here today, Sean Combs is innocent. He is innocent until proven guilty. And he hasn't been found liable either in any lawsuit that he faces. But, I should say maybe as of yet, we'll see where it goes. But I want to go back to the parties. Combs was famous, of course, for his white parties, these massive celebrations. Everybody's wearing white attire. All the celebrities come out. Aside from all the politicians and the movie stars, as a record label executive, Combs also had a lot of relationships with people in that industry, and that included with young artists that he seemingly plucked out of obscurity and thrust onto the main stage of the music world. And one of those people is Machine Gun Kelly. So Machine Gun Kelly, whose real name is Colson Baker, now just goes by MGK, he released 4 mixtapes before he signed on officially with Sean Combs' Bad Boy Records, which operated under Interscope Records back in 2011. His debut studio album was a massive success, rose to the top of the charts. Since then, his style has bounced back and forth between rock and hip-hop. He's gone on several tours alongside artists like Avril Lavigne, Justin Bieber, Young Thug. So safe to say, working with Sean Combs helped launch his career. By the way, I have to say, I think I spend about 80% of my day working on Sidebar stories like this, and I'm constantly in a rush. I'm constantly working on this, and it's a great thing. We love doing it, but that day-to-day can be a lot, and we have this awesome app that we're now using. It's actually provided, I think the best way to say it is an upside to my day-to-day. It's actually called Upside, perfectly named. Why? Because it's a free app that when you're buying your daily essentials like gas, groceries, food, it can get you cash back, real money that appears in your Upside app that you can then transfer right into your bank account. Look, as you can see here, I used Upside to find a gas station. I claimed an offer. I pay with my credit card, followed the steps on the app. I got cash back. And you can use Upside at all different kinds of places that you go to every day, restaurants, convenience stores. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen. And make sure to use our promo code SIDEBAR and you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. 9 years ago, in 2015, MGK sat down with Sean Evans for the show Hot Ones on the First We Feast YouTube channel. Now, if you haven't seen the show, it's awesome. Evans interviews celebrities as they eat hotter and hotter wings. It gets really funny, really uncomfortable. It's a really interesting way to do an interview. Unfortunately, I have no snacks. No one feeds me here at Law&Crime, but that's a separate issue. Anyway, Evans asks MGK about his experiences with Diddy and what his first taste of what is a very lavish lifestyle. What was that like? And MGK says, well, Sean Combs invited him to come out to Las Vegas to party with him, and it was something. And what he says is, we get there, he has the biggest suite in the Palms, there's waterfalls in his room, there's an effing river in his room. He's like, all right, we're gonna go out. That's how he said it. He said, we're gonna go out. I'm like, I'm 20 years old. MGK, shut the F up, let's go to the effing club. So we go to the club, get into every single club, it's New Year's Eve. This mother effer, he takes me to 9 effing clubs in one night. 9 effing clubs. 4 is crazy. You know what I'm saying? This is 9 effing clubs. So this speaks not only to the opulent lifestyle that Combs was living, but also to the influence he had, right? He's Sean Combs, one of the biggest music producers and artists in the world. He has his own clothing line. He's doing deals with liquor brands. He's appearing in movies and TV shows. He's a big deal, and it seems that whatever Combs wanted, he got. And for prosecutors, the idea would be, you can't say no to him. Now back to MGK, he claims Combs ordered around 30 bottles of liquor at each club, and they allegedly went to 9 clubs over a 2-day period without sleeping. In the interview, he said, 270 bottles. I don't know where those went. Confetti everywhere, women everywhere, 9 spots over. I'm like, I'm poop, man. You know what I mean? Peace out. You going to sleep? No, we're not going to effing sleep. And this lasted for 2 effing days, and I didn't see him sleep one time. Remember, get him to the Greek? That was this mother effer. Now, it's interesting that MGK mentions Get Him to the Greek, which Combs starred in with Jonah Hill and Russell Brand, and he actually portrayed a record label owner, perhaps art imitating life. And in the movie, there are several scenes that come across differently given Combs' charges. For example, in one scene, Combs, whose character's name is Sergio Roma, seemingly assigns sexual partners.
Pay attention. You are gonna go and have sex with Aaron right now.
It's disrespectful.
Aaron, go with your destiny.
And remember, there are allegations against Diddy basically accusing him of being a sort of puppet master when it comes to these sexual performances. There's another scene from the movie where it shows Brand and Hill's characters literally trying to escape from a chaotic party while Sergio Roma, Sean Combs, chases them down a hallway.
This is the longest hallway of all time! It's Kubrickian! You cannot outrun me!
And what's eerie about that is the leaked security video from 2016 showing Combs chasing his then girlfriend Cassandra Ventura down a hotel hallway in only a towel, eventually catching up to her at a bank of elevators and assaulting her, hitting her, kicking her, dragging her multiple times. According to Cassie's now settled lawsuit against Combs, she was trying to get away from a freak-off. When CNN released the surveillance video earlier this year, Combs apologized in an Instagram video saying he regretted his actions. And this isn't even the only time a guest on Hot Ones was asked about Combs, because if we go back to 2019, actor Ashton Kutcher appeared on the show. And you might remember that he and Sean Combs, they were friends for years after they both worked on shows at MTV in the early 2000s. And he referred to the relationship as bizarre. And when he tried to think of a story that he could tell Evans, he just kept saying, I've got a lot I can't tell you that one. Kutcher, by the way, has never commented publicly about the accusations against his friend, or maybe I should say former friend. But I am joined right now by attorney Natalie Whittingham-Burrell to talk more about this. Natalie, so good to see you. Thanks for coming on. I love having you on to talk about all the cases, but also about the Diddy case in particular, because there's so many different elements to it. What do you make of this interview from MGK almost 10 years ago? You think it's relevant? You think it's interesting? What do you take away from it?
Thank you so much for having me. I love being on the show. I think relevant and interesting are understatements. It's definitely interesting and certainly relevant. Actually, I was quite surprised when I watched the interview for how many things that MGK said that kind of correlated with things seen in Cassie's lawsuit and the indictment against him by the feds. So I do think it's very relevant. And there were quite a bit of things in there that raised some alarms for me, even though I'm a little skeptical of us combing through everyone that's ever spoken about Diddy ever, because he's one of the most famous and influential people in the United States. So people are going to interact with him, know him, have stories about him. But this story was particularly actually alarming and I think informative when it comes to the underlying cases here.
What stood out to you? What was most alarming to you?
Yeah, so first and foremost, Machine Gun Kelly says that he was 20 years old when Diddy had him fly out to Las Vegas. He was not old enough to drink. He was old enough to fly out on his own, old enough to participate consensually in whatever sex he wanted to participate in. But he was not old enough for Diddy to be, furnishing him with mountains of champagne. Also, as to the issue of consent, Machine Gun Kelly says that eventually the party goes on so long, it gets so crazy, he wants to go home. And Diddy gives him something, and he feels as though he's been up partying for days, right? After whatever it is that he's given. He doesn't know exactly what it is that he's taking. And I don't think it's any secret that to this day, Machine Gun Kelly has expressed maybe not a current, but an ongoing struggle with addictions issues. So to take someone who's 20 years old and put them in that circumstance and put him in a situation where maybe even he doesn't quite realize what he's doing or what's going on, parallels what Cassie was alleging and what other people have alleged in their lawsuits against him and what the federal government has alleged against him. And because this is a RICO case, which would have more evidence about an ongoing course of conduct over time, as in there's a pattern of behavior that leads to this racketeering. Even though this is something that happened 10 years ago, this might actually be directly relevant to the case to show that behavior of having people participate in sex acts and dehydrating them and sleep depriving them and drugging them to the point where they don't actually know what they're doing. And all of those little factors, dehydration, sleep deprivation, and drugging, were all mentioned by Machine Gun Kelly.
Yeah, and to be clear, I mean, I don't think he made a direct reference. I was part of a freak off or anything like that. And there's a difference between wild parties and freak offs. You know, I did a whole other episode about this, about freak offs in general, and it's the idea of the commercial sex workers, it's the forced fraud or coercion, it's the copious amounts of drugs that elevate this to actually not just group sex, but a crime. But having said that, you know, it's interesting to see whether or not something like this would play a role in a case like this. Do you think? Because again, how expansive do prosecutors want to be? Are they say we're only going to focus on freak offs, or we're going to also talk about other parties where things happen? Because if you look at the indictment, it's mostly about freak offs.
The indictment is very edited, very conservative, I think is a good way to put it. And I think the prosecutors were very clear about not really so much judging a lifestyle, but judging the lack of consent. So in reality, this probably would not be introduced in the trial itself, but it's certainly aggravating if there was a sentencing, for example. Like you've been, bringing 20-year-olds out to Vegas and giving them drugs and they don't even know what it is and telling them to keep going,
Yeah.
even though they're tired and they want to stop. That wouldn't be so good to hear in a sentencing, for example. So yeah, I agree with you.
Let me amplify that. So this is what happened. He says that he smoked something that Diddy gave him, and he was about to go to the airport and he wanted something to knock him out for the flight, but he says it did the opposite. He says, I was doing crazy dance moves to the weirdest music for 20 minutes straight, like while he was on the phone, and I was just outside the window looking in while he was looking at me like, man, this kid's nuts. But again, it's eerie because there are allegations that Sean Combs drugged people. And, I mean, when you hear that, that doesn't look good.
The context in which he's speaking about it is, I'm a young kid, I'm having fun at this crazy party, I'm down on my luck, right? He says he's sleeping at his manager's mom's sofa or something. He's down on his luck, he doesn't know what his next move is, and Sean P. Diddy Combs says, come to Vegas and come to this party. That is an already coercive environment. You add into that, or at least a power imbalance, right? Even if he wants to be there. You add into that, I think I'm taking one drug because I want to go home. He gives me another drug that forces me to stay. I think that is actually problematic when it comes to the issue of consent, and also informed consent when it comes to whatever substances people are taking. And although it's not a one-to-one, correlation, it's eerie, right? And it's kind of like a foreshadowing that this doesn't seem healthy or necessarily safe. Now, is it illegal? Different question, but it doesn't seem healthy and safe. And so I think it's interesting.
Do you think that prosecutors already knew this story? What do I mean by that? A big question I keep getting asked is, who are they talking to? How many celebrities are they talking to? Are they talking to almost anybody that went to a Diddy party? Are they talking to everybody that went to a freak off? I mean, this is an interesting story from MGK. I don't know. We're talking about how it might play in the case. Do you think he spoke to them? I mean, would we know that? Do you think his testimony is relevant? Even if they just speak to him about information about Sean Combs, he may never be called as a witness, right? So do you think that somebody like a Machine Gun Kelly has spoken to prosecutors?
There's the interplay here between the legal system and culture. And then within the hip hop community, there is a no snitching rule, right? So voluntarily speaking to law enforcement, I don't think as much of that is happening in this case, because at the press conference, the prosecutor said, if anyone has any further information, please come forward. They want to talk to people. I don't know if people will necessarily talk. So without calling him to the stand to testify, placing him under subpoena, giving him the opportunity to, have an attorney to try to quash that subpoena, I wouldn't see someone like MGK being volunteering to come forward and to speak to law enforcement or the prosecutors without being forced to do so. And I think that might apply to a lot of people, especially if they don't know if they could potentially have some type of criminal liability.
I guess my question is, it's different than like if I was a documentary filmmaker and I wanted to learn everything about Sean Combs' life, I'd interview as many people as possible. When you're a prosecutor, you don't need to interview every celebrity that knew him or every person that partied with him. You have to be kind of controlled and, as you said, conservative with respect to those charges and those allegations to prove that specific charge. But I also wonder, are they saying, let's speak to more people and maybe there's more criminal conduct we could charge him with?
Right. I think, okay, so I guess I'll say, I think it would be smart to attempt to do that. I think that any law enforcement official in a case of this scope should try to do that. But I think that given the code of silence in the hip hop community, that they would run into issues and they would have a hard time with that. It makes me think of the YSL trial, which was a RICO case that was not conservative. It should have been more conservative. It should have been whittled down a bit more. And they went out and they got everybody, gave everyone immunity. And then when they got people on the stand, no one wanted to testify because no one really wants to snitch, right? So that's the kind of issues that the prosecutors could run into. And maybe they'll learn from those mistakes in Georgia and say, you know what, let's keep it to just the facts, ma'am, all the elements that we need to prove our offense and that only, and not bring in any outside actors.
That's a good comparison right there. I guess one other thing to suggest would be, if they are trying to prove that Combs' power, his influence, his wealth is what led to this force, fraud, or coercion, that people could not do what they wanted to do, they couldn't say no, then how much of a story do they have to build up to the jury? I'm sure all the jury members, when this trial, if it happens in May, will know who Sean Combs is. But to understand his reach, his power, the ability, if you said no to him, what could happen? I wonder if that is broad, and they need to expand that a little bit with evidence that might not be directly about a freak off that happened on this date at this time, but maybe to tell more of a story.
Yeah, and stories are important to juries, putting things in context, because you have the what happens in the trial. Though that universe of facts is not the universe of facts in the real world, right? Because we have rules of evidence and we have to protect people's rights and things like that. So necessarily, we just don't find out everything that you would know had you been, as a juror, living through the situation. So it does help to get as many of those facts as possible. So let's say that people actually did want to cooperate. They saw the video of Cassie being brutally beaten by Diddy. They saw that he paid out to her pretty much immediately. They saw the allegations by all the other people that had brought lawsuits, and they read the indictment. They said, you know what? I'm going to do my civic duty. I'm going to come forward. I'm going to speak. That would actually be helpful if they were able to procure that type of evidence. And the court didn't say that it was, more prejudicial than it is probative, right? But yeah, that would be helpful to explain to any jury, this is not just a one-off event, or this is not just flying in some prostitutes. This is a person who has an excise amount of control over people and has the ability to really, really harm them and blackmail them. And he used that control to assault people, essentially, in a sexual manner. So that would be helpful if they could procure the evidence.
Natalie Whittingham-Burrell, thank you so much for coming on, trying to break down what this could mean. Really appreciate it. Great seeing you as always.
Thank you so much, Jesse.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.